Hello everyone, welcome back to Time&Tell. This week on the channel we have a very special piece in for review. It is the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch. Now this is the original Moonwatch edition with the Heslite crystal and manual wind movement. I'm going to break down a little bit more into the history of this watch and the history of the Omega Speedmaster family. I'm also going to talk a little bit more about technical specifications on the piece, talk about general aesthetics, pros and cons, overall value, and give my final thoughts. So let's get started. Now in this video I'm not going to talk specifics on the history of Omega. I've done that in earlier videos which I'm going to link below. But I'm going to talk specifically on the history of the Omega Speedmaster. The first Speedmaster was introduced in 1957 and it was a sports and racing timepiece. And was a part of Omega's trilogy of tool watches. Now this included the Seamaster, the Railmaster, and of course the Speedmaster. The original Speedmaster was referenced CK2915. Now that was designed by Swiss engineer Claude Ballot, and it used the Lemania caliber 321 movement. Now Lemania being a subsidiary of Omega at the time, it was a joint venture between the two divisions of the company. But the watch really broke into infamy, or fame I should say, in 1962 when astronaut Wally Schirra wore it on his Gemini mission into space. And this watch was known as truly the first Omega in space. Now in 1962, NASA did not have a standardized watch for its astronauts. They felt that that might be something crucial, especially for accuracy and even safety. You wouldn't want a watch breaking down or shattering in space, and that was a lot of the concerns NASA had when they were deciding on what watch to use for their program. So they put a call out in '62 for the major brands such as Breitling, Longines, Rolex, Hamilton, and of course Omega to throw in some pieces for them for testing. In 1965, after an extensive battery of testing, and one of the most rigorous testings for any watch for timepieces endured till this day, the Omega Speedmaster was the only one of all the watches that passed. And 3 were given to the Gemini space crew later that year. Now the Speedmaster kept propelling itself forward in the space program, and what really set this watch apart was in 1969 when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin wore their Omega Speedmasters to the moon. Now, Neil Armstrong had to take his Speedmaster off and hang it up in the lunar module due to their timepiece supposedly malfunctioning. They needed a working clock in the module, so he left his piece on the spaceship. Now, Buzz Aldrin is known to be wearing his Speedmaster when they walked on the moon, and therefore Omega is definitely the first watch in space, specifically the Omega Speedmaster. Now, the history of the watch did not stop there. In 1970, Apollo 13 astronaut Jack Swigert used his Speedmaster to time the critical burn that the astronauts of Apollo 13 needed to return home. This watch has just been building up a lot of momentum in terms of watch lore. Now, the last little tidbit for fame for this watch was 1968, even before the moon landing. This watch was given to the crew that trekked across the North Pole. Again, this watch being the first watch to go to the extremes of the Earth as well as extremes of space. There's a lot of history behind this piece, and I think that's what adds a lot of value. When we talk about watches, only 2 watches to me stand out in terms of classics, and that's the Rolex Submariner and of course the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. Now let's talk specifics behind this watch itself. I'm going to start with dimensions. This piece sits at 42 millimeters across the face of the dial, a thickness of 10 millimeters, a lug-to-lug measurement of 47 millimeters, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. It has very classic dimensions, and it sits very nicely on the wrist, a very contemporary size, and probably in 1969 this was considered one of larger timepieces. Today it's at that right sweet spot, I think, on any wrist size. Now, I know earlier I had mentioned that NASA was concerned about safety of their pilots. I think one of the reasons this watch stood out to NASA engineers was the display itself is made of Heslite crystal. Now, for those of you who don't know, most watches use sapphire nowadays, and the reason people use sapphire is very scratch resistant. Although it is prone to shattering, not easily, but it can shatter. Heslite, although it scratches easily, it's known to be very shatter resistant. Now, if you're floating in zero gravity, the last thing you want is shards of sapphire floating around in the capsule. I think that's one of the reasons that NASA preferred this timepiece. And I also like the look of the Heslite on this. I know it gives that very vintage distortion look from the side. To me, that's very beautiful. I do recommend to people who look into this watch to prefer the Heslite version. I also want to talk about the movement on this watch. It uses the caliber 1861, which is a derivation of the caliber 321 initially used in the 1960s. It's a manual wind timepiece. Now, what that means is by wearing this watch on your wrist, the only way for it to maintain a charge in the barrel is for you to actually manually turn this crown, and it takes about 80 turns to get a full charge in it. Now I know that seems like a lot, but it goes fairly quickly, and the power reserve on this is about 48 hours. What's interesting is I think another reason NASA preferred to use a manual wind timepiece in space is, in space at zero gravity, it might be hard for the rotor of the watch itself to load a charge into the barrel. A manual wind really allows you to force a charge into this timepiece. Now this is before quartz were actually popular and relatively cost effective. This was probably the best at the time, and what really stands a testament is that NASA engineers still use this watch today. I think it's a very classic timepiece, and the movement is tried, tested, and proven throughout the years, and it's a solid timepiece with very little change, showing that the value is still in here. I also want to show the case back on this watch, and as you can see here, there's an engraving that this watch has been certified by NASA for all manned space travel. I think that adds to the history of this timepiece, and it's a nice little addition to this watch. It's, again, a piece of history that you're wearing on your wrist. Now that we talked about the technical specification of this piece briefly, let's also talk about general aesthetics. Now, I know a lot of people think that this watch looks very plain and very ordinary, and it hasn't really changed much since the 60s, but to me, that's part of the appeal of this piece. This is a true engineering tool, and as we've discussed in the history of this timepiece, it's gone to the North Pole, it's been to space, it's been to the moon. It carries a lot of weight, and I hear that NASA is working with Omega to design a watch that if they ever travel to Mars, it would be the Omega for, Earth to Mars watch. And to me, that's great, and I know they make a lot of versions of the Speedmaster, and there are many iterations, but the classic version, just the clean look of the dial, the crown and the pushers right here, and just the vintage look, this watch really carries a lot of weight in terms of general aesthetics, and I think less is more in this case. And if you wear this piece, I think you'll appreciate it after time. I mean, it's a very clean looking dial, very simple watch, and it's not as flashy as timepieces that are out there today, but I think it just carries a lot of weight if it's being used for the last 50 to 60 years, and it's still going strong. What I really love about this watch is just how versatile it is. I mean, the owner put it on this custom-made leather watch band, and it really makes the dial pop. This black and white dial with this beautiful band. But the watch originally came on the Omega bracelet. And let me get this in focus. This is the classic bracelet, the new style, upgraded with the screws, but it gives a very tool watch look to this piece. And the watch also comes with a Nato strap from Omega, and in addition to, it's a very beautiful strap. And in addition to that strap, you get a Velcro strap, and what's interesting about this is what the astronauts used to wear around their spacesuits. So they couldn't really wear the metal band around the spacesuit itself. They would put that Velcro strap and thread it through the watch, and it looks very cool if you look at the pictures of Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin wearing their spacesuits with the watch strapped outside. It shows that this watch is really a tool. Now, the other thing that I find very cool about this watch is the versatility. I mean, this can go with NATO straps, it can go with different kinds of leather straps, whether it be black leather, or it can go with more of a rugged brown leather. It just works really well, and I think that's what's interesting about this piece. And I also forgot to mention, I mean, what's great about this is the actual functionality. This is a tool, in addition to aesthetics. By starting the chronograph function, you can see here you have your tachyometer, and I know in earlier videos I've explained how the tachyometer works. I can link that below as well. I just think it adds a lot to the tool watch function features of this piece. Now, I started off the chronograph function, and let's stop it and reset it. Very clean, very classic, and it is a tool. I do use this if I have to time something, or whether it be cooking on the stove or doing something where I'm waiting and I have a time interval to wait for. I think it's very neat. About this piece, I mean, just the history behind the watch, the look of the dial. I mean, and now to talk a little bit about the cons, there's not many. A lot of people say the Hess-like crystal is a negative. I actually enjoy it, and I've been seeing that this watch has not suffered many scratches across the Hess-like crystal itself, and there's a very easy fix. For about $4 to $5 or maybe $10 at most, you can buy something called Polywatch on Amazon. put a little tube and you can put it on top and it'll buff out all the scratches. I just think that takes away from any negatives that people might have about the crystal itself. I guess the only negative I could, and I'm reaching here to find one, is probably the actual crown itself. And turning it, it's not bad. It's doable, you know, especially wearing gloves right now, but it can be a little cumbersome at times, but I got used to it, and I guess you figure out a way to do it faster. 80 turns might sound like a lot to wind up the charge in this, but you get to enjoy it. I mean, I prefer watches that you bond with, and the user by winding this does bond with this timepiece, and to me that's part of the charm. So my overall thoughts and values of this piece, I think this is one of the classic timepieces that anyone can, I don't want to say invest in, but purchase. It'll always be in demand. It's been around since 1957. It's really shot up in fame since the late 60s with the Apollo program. I don't think it's going anywhere in the watch world. I mean, this is a safe and solid first starting point if you want to gain entry into the luxury world of watches. It's a classic timepiece, and I'm a fan not just of the look and the history behind it, but just the fact that I know 50 years from now I could still be wearing this watch and it's going to carry the same impact and weight that it did today or as it did 50 years ago. But I think for the money, you're getting a good value of this piece. I know their MSRP is quite high, but these can be picked up from an AD or even on a forum at a reasonable price. I would definitely suggest trying this on if you're hesitant or if you're interested in this, and take a look at the original Speedmaster Hesselite manual wind movement. I think that's a good starting point. And there you guys have it. That's been my review of the Omega Speedmaster Professional. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below, and also feel free to share it. And I look forward to talking to you guys again on Time and Tell. Thanks, guys.